So this is Mental Imagery Through the Lens of Aphantasia by Christian O. Scholz. And it's a symposium paper, it looks like. And this is in, Mind and Language, it said? Yeah, Mind and Language. And this is recent stuff. So, as always, feel free to ask me questions along the way. My first time reading it too. I am not endorsing this work. I am just trying to see what it is. Yeah, so Frank says, if you told me to think of the sky, I would think of a vast open space. If you asked me if it was blue, I would introduce the fact of being blue into Frank's thoughts. It wouldn't have to be blue or not blue beforehand, but now I know that's the dimension you wanted to add to Frank's thoughts. Yeah, so cool. Different ways to do it, but you could do that. I mean, the whole point of Aphantasia is that you can't do that. So it's like they can't think of the sky being blue, like the vastness of the sky being blue. They could tell you the vastness of the sky and that it is blue, but they can't like see the vast blue sky. So it's like it's a different way of doing stuff. Interesting. Frank says, but with maps, like turn left in 100 meters can be part of the thoughts without it being visual. Yeah, and so it's like I'm more on the language side of the world, but I don't have a problem. I can force myself to come up with stuff. So it's like, yeah. Lumen says, I sort of have a Wittgenstein-style discomfort with the discourse about these kinds of things. I don't doubt that there are many different styles of visualization, but it seems like the discussion doesn't always take the mediating distortions of attempting to communicate my mental representations to someone else into account as much as it should. That's fair. Like, what does it actually mean that I'm pulling up an image of that thing in the corner? Like, how does it actually work? Is that worth anything? And you might be right. It might not be worth anything, like, claiming that pain has some, like, realness in my body. Well, you can't see the mental image that I'm pulling up. You just have to take my word for it. I'm just describing it. So, like, I'm trying to tell you an experience I'm having, like an experience of pain, and it's completely fair that, like, we don't have a good grasp on this stuff yet. So I'm actually in complete agreement with you, Luminance, but I wouldn't also deny that, like, I have pain, you have pain, and if someone says, like, you poke me over here and I'm like, ow, and I poke someone else there and they're like, well, that didn't hurt. It's like, okay, that doesn't hurt them if I do that. Like, if they say they don't have a mental representation, I say, well, I do. It's like, I have a pain, you don't. Whatevers. Germans are good at Fantasia, particularly how maps of Europe could look differently. Yes. Well, you know how, like, political map drawing is. It turns out, like, I didn't realize one time, like, someone was like, oh yeah, that map is bullshit. I'm like, what? It's like, it's all political. So it's like, yes. Yeah. Okay. You're also Aphantasia, says Frank. Oh, you don't see it? Oh, okay. Yeah, see? There we go. So it's like, yeah, you can, like, put it together, but you're putting it together in a different way. That's fair. All right, so here we go. All right, so as always, here we go. And it's only 8 pages, so hopefully we'll get through it. But it looks like people want to chat about this too, so that's cool. Setting the scope. So Nane's engaging and thought-provoking book, Mental Imagery, Philosophy, Psychology, and Neuroscience. That's Bence Nane. I think I've read Bence on stream a few times, a long time ago though, and yeah, he's doing, like, philosophy and psychology and stuff, so it's cool. Cool work. And there's, like, some illusions we've discussed on stream, so Bence is a good philosopher, like, cool stuff. Yeah. Well, yeah, that's fair, Yov, but, like, it's medical. It's more of a medical thing too, so yeah. Okay, so Nane's engaging in thought-provoking book, Mental Imagery, Philosophy, Psychology, and Neuroscience, is a culmination of his almost 2 decades-long philosophical engagement with the topic of mental imagery. As is characteristic of his work, instead of opting for a long-winded armchair treatise, Nane delivers a tightly written and argued interdisciplinary-minded account that synthesizes philosophical analysis with empirical evidence to work towards a highly unified theory of various mental phenomena. After defining mental imagery and introducing numerous distinctions to taxonomize its types, Nane dedicates the remainder of the book to arguing that mental imagery of one type or another is crucially involved in our multimodal perception, cognition, and action. En route, he uses his account of mental imagery to propose new viewpoints and solutions for a range of empirical and philosophical debates and puzzles. Yes, Frank is fantastic. Okay, let's just see. In this commentary, I will mostly focus on Nane's proposal that some people who report not experiencing visual mental imagery, a cognitive norm variant referred to as aphantasia, have unconscious mental imagery. See, this is interesting. Nane wants to just be like, no, you do have mental imagery, you just can't talk about it for some reason. So I always find these arguments really interesting because they're really fucking, patronizing. So they're like, no, you do have this, you just don't know it. And what I say is right, and you are telling me the wrong thing about your experience. This is one of the things I've really tried to avoid in my personal work. That doesn't make the people who do this wrong. It's just I don't like telling people what their experience is. No one philosophies like Gaston, exactly. Yeah, okay. So this might, at least at first glance, seem to be a narrow scope considering the breadth of the book. However, not only does the distinction between conscious and unconscious imagery mark the arguably most controversial distinction Nane introduces, but the evidence I will discuss will allow the author to also touch upon more general concepts of Nane's account, such as the function of mental imagery and multimodal mental imagery. The author will start their commentary with some general remarks about the proposed definition of mental imagery before turning to the topic of aphantasia. Frank says, I can see how it would be taken as patronizing, but also how would anyone know? Maybe I can visualize without knowing, or maybe you guys don't really visualize, just pretend to. It's fine either way. Yeah, but... yes, Frank, but like... it's me telling you that, like, I can do something that you can't do. It's like, I have mental imagery, and you're doing it. You just don't know about it. And it's like, I find... and you're right that it doesn't have to be taken as weird or bad or, like, rude to tell people, like, that this is actually how your brain's working, even though you don't experience it the way that other people do. But, like, I just find that sort of an argument structure, generally want to avoid it. Because it's like, it's saying something about, like, the way people are, and then saying other people are deviant off that. And I don't really like those arguments. Yeah. But, I mean, it doesn't have to be done in a patronizing way. Okay, so you guys are still talking about the continental stuffs, blah, 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 blah. Adam says, I think they can see mental pictures, but only in dreams and not during the waking state. Yeah, I don't know how it goes. Paul says, grabs popcorn is going to be good. Adam says, aphantasia means they cannot generate a mental image. So if you ask a picture a color pencil, then you can ask what color it is. Color being a visual act, they will feel confused since the experience of the pencil is more like a word. Yeah, but as Frank was saying, you can be like, oh, it's blue. And then you say, well, they know the word blue. You can be like, it's blue pencil. Like, this is my orange pencil. Orange pencil. Right there. It's orange. So, yeah. Okay. Okay, so here we go. Mental imagery and shared representations. Nane defines mental imagery as perceptual representation that is not directly triggered by sensory input. By perceptual representation, he means a representation involved in processing in the perceptual system, which he views as primarily consisting of the earliest areas involved in the processing of external sensory stimuli, for example, the primary visual cortex, such V1, whatever that is, in the case of visual perception. Crucially for Nane, both what is classically understood as perception, he calls this sensory stimulation driven perception, and mental imagery are instances of perceptual processing, with the mark of mental imagery being the absence of a direct causal link between input and processing. However, Nane adds that his talk of perceptual processing should not be understood neuroanatomically, but rather functionally, meaning that it does not matter in which early perceptual region the processing is carried out, as long as said processing fulfills the function of perception. But what is the function of perception? At a later point in the book, Nane suggests that while he prefers to leave the function of the sense modalities in perceptual processing open, the function of visual perception may be, quote, something like helping small-scale spatial discrimination or transforming input in a way that preserves spatial homomorphism between the input and perceptual processing, end quote. These proposed functions are best exemplified by the retinopathy of V1, which Nane suggests can be used as a diagnostic criterion for visual mental imagery, in the sense that if there is no spatial correspondence between the activations in the early visual areas and the sensory input, then the former could not have been triggered directly by the latter, meaning that it is mental imagery. Okay, you guys are all discussing amongst yourselves. Okay, I don't know. Yeah. Baidu. Yeah, you guys are all talking like Baidu and stuff. Okay, however, next to the correspondence or lack thereof between visual processing and sensory input, there is another less prominently featured correspondence, namely that between neural activity during perception and imagery in the form of shared representations, that is, neural patterns that encode overlapping or similar information for different stimuli, tasks, or conditions. Shared representations can be quantified in two ways. First, one can compute the representational overlap by using representational dissimilarity matrices to identify the spatial correlation between activities observed in different tasks. Second, one can test for cross-decodability, that is, one can use machine learning algorithms trained on multivoxel pattern derived from one condition, for example perception, to decode the content of patterns obtained in another condition, for example imagery, and vice versa. Okay. No, you don't have to be sorry, Yevko. It's just I don't know. Like, it's hard to tell if you're responding to someone else. I don't always know if you're commenting on the paper. I have to like look quickly. That's fine. It's all fine. You guys can discuss in chat like your Marxism and other in Frankfurt schools. That's cool. Okay. Importantly, cross-decodability implies that shared representations preserve functional equivalence even if the specific neural activity patterns differ, thus giving us a strong criterion for when a representation should be considered to be perceptual. With this context in place, let us move on to the discussion of aphantasia. Alright, so this makes sense. So it's like if there's something in the world that actually maps onto crap going on in your brain, clearly then it looks like a causal thing. You've got the thing in the world, and you can see like the little neurons, like, you know, making the shapes of the things in the world. Okay. Then there's also stuff where you can compare different neural structures to like how it gets reused in different ways. So if you've got like a neural structure that you know gets used for like things ABC and it doesn't correlate to the world, or it does correlate to the world DC like FGHI, then you can be like, well, that pattern correlates to this one because it's correlated with the mental structures. So you've got like a second link there. But then again, you can say, well, these two diverge, and you can say, well, this does not actually correlate with anything in the in the world outside. Are we still responding to the stupidity of Descartes? Is this still a thing? Yes, we're still. What's up, Dojo? Yes, we are still dealing with Descartes. It's gonna be a long time before we finally be like, no, Descartes was wrong or Descartes was right. It's still a big deal. Well, Luminance, the only problem is the free emote follows you can only use on your channel when you're like, the free ones only get, even just the follow emotes are only for your channel. So yes, Descartes was wrong. I'm with you on this stuff. But I don't think we're past Cartesian philosophy in general, I'm saying. So I think it's going to be a while before philosophers and the rest of like humanity figure out actually what we want to do about this. Yeah, so yeah, that's one of the problems. You don't get to take the follower emotes with you. Dogan says, worst idea in the history of the world. Not stupid, but harmful. Descartes was clearly wrong. I mean, I guess from a certain perspective that, like, you could say this is really fucked up the last 500 years. Yeah. But then again, this is how this shit goes. Philosophy is a long game. Like, there's an argument, actually, that the worst thing was that Aristotle didn't really like Stoic logic, and the Stoics' logic was better. And we would be way ahead of the game if we had used Stoic formalisms over the syllogism. That might actually be one of the worst things that has happened in philosophy. But yeah. K-Par says, yeah, I mean, we're still struggling with how to make a complete physicalist theory. Yeah, and that's it. And people are going to try really hard to make a complete physicalist theory. And we're not anywhere near that yet, in my opinion. So it's like, that's not going to die. People love their physicalism. Boy, do they love their physicalism. And it's difficult. It's a difficult theory. So, yeah. I also hate qualia. K-Pars, but yeah. K-Bar says Descartes was very wrong, but also making an airtight physicalist monism is very hard. Yeah, exactly. Yep. Doug says, did particle go through the left or right slit? Wave particle, mind body. Yeah. We need Ivan here. He's a committed physicalist. Yeah. It's the on the philosophy side, I think it's got a lot of difficult issues, physicalism. So it's like, but that doesn't mean I have a solution to it. It just means that like it's just we're still working through this stuff. Natty says, can we at least give it to Descartes that his method was GOAT, even if his critique sucks? That's also debatable. Like, what is radical skepticism? Again, we're still working through Cartesian philosophy. Like, we have plenty of reasons to still think about Descartes and reason through Descartes. And so it's like, we're not there yet. Like, maybe, like, there is no question about Descartes being one of the most important philosophers in the last 500 years. Now, what will the eventual decision be made? Like, what will like future people think? I don't know. Like, we're going to move away from that. I'm with Luminance on this. I think the dualism is bad, or Cartesian dualism is bad, but we'll see. Lumen says Descartes has made such important developments in math and the self-conscious grounding thing. Primo, yeah. Yov says, I don't think he had like a single unified method for his philosophy. Yeah. So, we'll see. K-Par says, psychoneural identity just glosses over the issue of how it happens. I get there's supervenience or a correlation between mental states and brain states. I don't think there's a separate mental substance, but we should be able to show how we get the picture of reality in our hands. Yeah, and that's the problem. You say, well, we should be able to do it. How? We haven't got there yet. A lot of smart people, not just hundreds of years ago. A lot of smart people right now are trying to work on this, and we still haven't solved this. And it's not just a question of, like, we need better computers or better, experimental devices to see how the brain's working. We just don't know how the things correlate. So it's like, we just don't know how it works. Lumen says, I'm not even pro or anti-qualia. I just think the concept doesn't even make sense. Yeah, I mean, that's part of the problem. I was actually thinking about this not that long ago. Yeah, I have to like write down what I was thinking actually. Yeah. So Natty's talking about, I guess, the foundationalism, like, I think, therefore I am. So it's like undoubtable, self-evident knowledge. But like, you have to realize, Natty, philosophers have been like poking at that for hundreds of years too. And so like exactly what that comes down to is interesting. Like, that's also a philosophical discussion. No one is denying I think, therefore I am is like stupid. But, well, maybe some people do. But like, exactly what does it amount to is part of the interesting question. What's wrong with qualia? Are we critiquing language issues with qualia? No, qualia, like, the idea is, well, if Luminance wants to say what he thinks is wrong with qualia, I don't think I think it's just a very contingent thing. I think qualia has a lot of baggage on the theory that I don't like. So it's like, I wouldn't use the word if it came up with me. Illumin says mental states and brain states are the kind of things where I feel like we're in deep on some seriously confused concepts. Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah. Yovko, I know people who reject phenomenal experience. And see, this is the issue. That's exactly right. People definitely do reject this. And so it's like, do we even have a grasp on what counts as human experience? And so people want to be like, well, there's a qualia, there's like a sense of blue. Really? Have you ever seen a qualia, or do you see blue things? What is the actual phenomenal experience? What do you actually experience in this world? Like, you see me, I have a mustache. Is there like a mustache qualia out there? Like, what the fuck? Like, do you see like a brown patch? No one sees a brown patch. Like, your experience is of like person or like words or something. We don't live in a world of like color patches. And so that's already a certain kind of abstraction away from how we organize our lives and discuss things and like interact with the world. And so the idea that like we are somehow putting the color patches together to see stuff, like, no, that is getting the cart before the horse. You're doing things in weird ways and you're trying to make it up. Yeah, I knew this is where we agree, Luminance. So it's like, what actually is a human experience? And it sure as fuck ain't putting colors together to like build up objects. Like, I just find that to be like seriously misguided. Okay. Okie doke. The curious case of aphantasia. Nane proposes that at least some aphantasics, people with aphantasia, have unconscious mental imagery, meaning that despite lacking imagery experience, see, this is what we're talking about. What is the experience of like the world and then thinking about the world? Now, we have people claiming aphantasia in chat. They say, I don't think of like images, but I do think of like properties of objects, and that makes sense. It does. Yov says, I mean, you can see a robot react to some color through a camera. It would seem to us this is different from phenomenal experience, like you need more than for that, but the people I know think we are just the same. Yeah, I mean, that is a very popular view. They are not crazy people. I don't think they're very good philosophers, though. Jokers, I ate too many cherries today, and my digestive experience has been less than phenomenal. Horrible joke. Sorry, I have a badum tisk, don't I? I think I do at the moment. But dumb. Do I have it? Where is it? Mermaid emote. Where's my mermaid emote? Aha! There we go. For our bad jokes. Okay. Okay, so where were we? Okay, so this proposal provides a possible solution to the puzzle of how aphantasics can solve visual imagery tasks, with the other main possible solution being that aphantasics are using alternative cognitive representational strategies. Okay, so I think what Frank was saying in chat was he uses a different strategy to solve what other people might use imagery tasks for. Entirely reasonable. Just, you can, more than one way to skin a cat. Or there's this Ben Snane, suggesting that some people do have mental imagery, and they're doing visual reasoning, but they don't have the experience of it. Okay. Continuing. In the context of the competency puzzle, Nane discusses a study reporting that an aphantasic woman, referred to as AI, performed a visual working memory task as accurately as controls, except for the highest level of difficulty. In the study, after AI is presented with the name of a geometrical shape, for example, diamond, on a display, she either sees said geometric shape on the screen or is told to visualize the shape within 4 placeholders. Then a random dot is displayed within the placeholders, and the participant has to judge whether the dot falls within or outside the boundaries of the perceived imagined shape. AI's competency on this task, then it argues, would be best explained by postulating that she has unconscious mental imagery. However, this consideration ignores the possibility of the result being explained via alternate strategy use. Yeah, and like I was saying, I actually have 2 streamers I watch who say they're aphantasic, and they both are fucking soul streamers. And so these are massively complicated games that they need huge amounts of information to process to like play well. Like, these are challenge runners. And so, like, if you know Souls games, like one of them is mainly Elden Ring player, the other one plays a lot of the other Souls. Hell, fucking just give Naz a shout out. Naz, I don't think it's a problem saying Nasrallah. He's one of my favorite streamers. I mean, all the people from Prof for Prof's chat will know Naz too, because he's over there. Like, he's great. So, like, he doesn't have like a visual memory, but he has to have the whole fucking game memorized in a different way, and that's how he says he does it. I don't think he's like, that's what he says. He has alternate strategies. Like, that's how he described it when like he was talking about it once. So, I don't want to put words in someone else's mouth, but like, this seems very reasonable that there's alternate strategies going on, and yeah, it's like, this makes perfect sense that this is a way to do it. I wonder if people exist that don't have a mental voice. Yeah, I've heard that claim too. I don't have like a voice, but like I have like words going on in my head. Frank says, you catch a ball thrown to you before you could possibly visualize where it's going. Yeah, there's other ways of doing things. That's absolutely right. That's a good example that gets brought up in heuristics. No one is calculating the path of a ball using like parabolas. There are a lot of ways to figure out where the ball's going based on cues in the real time. And that's what people actually do when they like figure out what baseball players are doing when a ball gets thrown to them. So, yeah. You he is? You he is? Who's you he is? I don't know what that means, Natty. Yeah. Okay. To solve the question of whether AI indeed has unconscious mental imagery, Nane proposes that one should check whether she has the same neural profile as controls. While Jacobs et al. Did not use any brain scans in their study, several recent studies did. In one study, Chang, aphantasics and controls, typical visualizers, were presented with red vertical or green horizontal Gabor patches in two target locations, right or left, on a screen, perception condition, and at another time cued via a Chinese letter to visualize their perspective Gabor patches. I don't know what a Gabor patch is. In the target areas. An imagery condition. Is there like a picture here? No, there's not. Okay. Although the authors report finding reliable neural representations in the early visual areas of aphantasics and controls, a cross-decoding analysis showed that these representations correspond to those during perception only for the controls. Okay, so only the controls actually use that thing, even if it was showing up sometimes. Interestingly, for aphantasics, the authors observed strong neural activity in the superior temporal gyri, an area associated with language and auditory-related information, thus pointing to alternative, non-visual, possibly semantic strategies. So it looks like, for a lot of these people, they were doing the language thing, or maybe an audio thing. Interesting. Yov says, at least the main person I know who rejects phenomenal experience is actually quite good at philosophy, a prodigy if they do say so themselves. No, they're bad at phenomenology then, that's fair, Yovko. They might be excellent at philosophy. I can guarantee, if they are saying that, I think they're terrible phenomenologists. That or they have a brain that is completely alien to my experience and everyone that I know. Which is fine, and that would be very interesting. But the people who deny that they think they are putting patches of color together, I can't even process what that would be like to experience life in that way. I don't even think that makes sense. I can't be like, oh yeah, these color patches come together to make my webcam I'm looking at right now. It's it just doesn't match up at all. Viper says, quotes, Gabor patches are stimuli frequently used in vision research that mimic the receptive field properties of neurons in the visual cortex. They consist of a sine wave grading, although light and dark stripes, alternating light and dark stripes enclosed within a Gaussian envelope, creating a patch-like appearance. These patches are versatile and can be manipulated in terms of spatial frequency, contrast, orientation, and location, making them useful for studying various aspects of visual perception. Thank you, Vipers. That is interesting. You would lean towards them being aliens? Entirely possible, Yovko. I don't know. Yeah. Oh, let's see. Actually, I want to see this. Thank you for the link, Vipers. Let's see what we got here. Oh, this sort of thing. Let's see if it shows up. Of course it doesn't. Where am I clicking? This one, then this one. Yeah, this sort of thing. So it's like a sine wave of light and dark, and that's kind of interesting. Yeah. Frank's like, why do you bother? Well, of course. I mean, this is just something I do. It's not like I'm trying to visualize it. Yeah. Gabor is another name for normal distribution. By analogy, it's black and white stripes viewed through a lens that is a normal distribution. Aha. Exclamation point paper. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, it seems like the alternate strategy is winning out in this scientific study. That it's not that they had unconscious stuff, it's that they were doing something slightly different, which is like I said, there's always more than one way to do stuff. Okay. Furthermore, as Dawes et al. Remarked, this result might contextualize the results of another study that found that activity in early visual areas during a delay period in which aphantasic participants were tasked to remember one of two previously presented and different oriented Gabor patches contained orientation-specific information. Since Weber et al. Did not use cross-decoding, this activation, despite being stimulus-specific, might not correspond to content-equivalent perceptual signals, or as the authors put it, it might be that the early visual cortex provides a neural substrate for multiple cognitive strategies, even if they are not encoded in the same format. Yeah, so multiple cognitive strategies, different formats. So, yeah. Okay. At this point, it's worth remarking that Nani says relatively little about the role of higher visual areas, focusing on early visual areas instead. However, the role and relevance of early visual areas, especially V1, for at least conscious imagery has been topic of debate. In this context, a recent meta-analysis found that a domain general area in the temporal cortex, which the authors refer to as the fusiform imagery node rather than the primary visual cortex, plays a key role in visual imagery across semantic domains. With this in mind, it should be noted that a recent study, Liu et al., found no evidence for representational overlap in higher visual areas in aphantasics for a battery of questions comparing visual properties, shapes, colors, letters, faces, and spatial relationships of targets that they had to either visualize imagery condition or could see on a screen perception condition. That is, despite finding that imagery tasks involved activities in domain-specific areas, for example, color-biased areas during color imagery tasks, in both aphantasics and controls, representational dissimilarity matrices showed that the correlation between perception and imagery conditions was only significant for controls. Yeah. Okay, so if K-Pars remembers correctly, V1 responds to motion, edges, orientation. Okay, yeah, so I guess this is they described it here as the early visual stuff, and that's definitely like the edges and stuff. That's what like we pick up on fastest. Okay. Taken together, these results generate tension for Nene's definition of mental imagery. On the one hand, the results indicate that aphantasics have activity in visual areas, and that this activity is representational in the sense that it is stimulus specific. Thus, since we have a representation involved in the processing in the perceptual system, this should count as mental imagery. However, on the other hand, since these representations do not appear to utilize shared representations as assessed via representational overlap and cross-decoding, it seems that they are not functionally equivalent to representations observed during perception, thus calling into question whether they should be viewed as perceptual representations and hence as mental imagery. If we include these representations under the umbrella of mental imagery, we might run the risk of making the concept of mental imagery too broad, capturing also activities that, while utilizing the same neural substrate, for example V1, might be related to alternative strategies and be different not just in degree, but in kind from perceptual representations. Thus, Nene's definition of mental imagery as perceptual representation that is not directly triggered by sensory input struggles when it is not clear what the concrete empirical criteria for assessing whether representation should count as perceptual or merely as occurring in the perceptual system are. However, as I argued above, imagery relies on shared representations, as Nene's definition seems to suggest, then the case is rather clear. Aphantasics, at least based on the recent neuroscientific evidence reviewed above, do not possess unconscious imagery. Frank says, it sounds like this fine hair splitting solves the issue completely. To Frank, it is not a Boolean visualization or not visualization. It is for some kinds of measurement, not for others. The better data makes it obvious we should use more words. I think that's where this author is going. Like, yeah, they're saying, look, of course you're getting in visual data, but then it's getting processed differently than the controls, as they were calling the phantasics. And that's like, yeah, I think that's exactly right. It's that there's a level of course, the perceptual input to whatever degree necessary, and then like it's going a different route in some people's brains. Fine. Yov says, I think an important idea to bring up now is the concept of folk psychology. Well, yes and no. So these people that we're discussing here are discussing hard neuroscientific studies. Well, no, they're discussing neuroscience, and they're discussing like professionally done studies and how to interpret the results. So in some sense, they're looking at brain activations. That is not folk psychology. That's neurology. And they're looking at the neuroimagery of where brain activations are happening when people are doing certain tasks. So the question is, are we doing psychology or are we doing neurology? And we're more in the neurology space here. So, yeah. What does the author regard as unconscious imagery? Okay, so what it looks like Nane wanted to say was that you're doing, like, the people who say they don't experience the imagery, they're still doing it, but they just lack the experience of it. So it's just like, yeah, say you can see something. Well, like, you're getting the information from what you might be looking at, but you don't actually have the experience of seeing it. So it's like that would be the unconscious thing. So you don't know that you're, like, actually bringing up the image and you're doing the image work, like the work, like, in that visual space, but you don't have the experience of doing that work in the visual space. Like me, I can think of, okay, what is the storefront on the corner look like? And I can bring it up and be like, oh yeah, if I can look at different things in that picture. That would be like, okay, they're doing that, but then they have no experience of bringing it up in the background. But yeah, there's other ways to do this. Yov says, I'll expand a bit. They're trying to map the neurological data to the folk psychological concepts and are clearly struggling. They said they don't want to be too wide or too slim, but why? It's just a folk psychological concept. Well, what do you mean by folk psychological concept there? Do you have visual experiences that you can think of? Like, it's a yes or no. And so it's like, is that folk psychology? Sure. But, like, that's all that's at stake here. Like, we're not talking about anything more than being able to, like, bring up an image in your mind and be like, and hold it there. Like, I can be like, orange pencil. Can you be like, okay, what did that orange pencil look like a few seconds ago? And bring up, like, what I look like with the orange pencil in front of my face. Like, yes or no, can you do that? Now, is that folk psychology? Not... I mean, yes, it's like you're asking someone to do a psychological task, but, like, it's a question of, like, do you have an experience of, like, recalling what it looks like in an experience of, like, looking like something? Visual imagination is a folk psychological content. Yes, but, like, what else is needed? What are you adding to the discussion by calling it folk psychology? Like, that's what I'm asking you. What else is there? Like, yeah, but, like, does folk psychology have any weight here? Like, what's it bringing to the conversation then? Like, it's an honest question. Cost says, when I play video games, let's say Assassin's Creed or Doom or Apex, I don't have a visual of the map in Cost's head, but I know where to go next based on the images in front of. Yeah, and that's probably true. Like, you might be able to bring up a map if you thought about it, but it's usually not necessary. There's other ways of doing things, and that's true for everyone. It's heuristics. A lot of heuristics are going on in your head, and so very few people are bringing up, like, elaborate maps or, like, pictures in their head all the time. Some people do, apparently, but, like, yeah. Adam says, like, when you buckle your seatbelt and didn't realize it. Yeah, so that would be the unconscious. Cost says, I have unconscious map in mind, but I don't necessarily see it. Yeah, well, you might think it's unconscious, but you might also be doing one of these other routes to get to the answer. And that's the idea. Like, you could be doing something else, not map. It's like, oh yeah, when I see this thing, I turn left. And that could be entirely semantic, as Frank was saying. Like, you see the sign that says turn left and you turn left. You don't have to have an image of, like, the turn left sign to be like, when I read the sign, turn left, I turn left. That's it. No big deal. Is it like camera working with the software's issue, corruptor, image or something? Yeah, maybe, Natty. Like, there's no, like, you don't want to put, like, corrupt on, like, the way people are seeing the world, because there are other ways of doing stuff. There's no one way that people are that's, like, the right way, especially when it comes to this stuff. So it's just like they just don't do this sort of strategy. Doesn't matter why. Yeah. Yov says, I think it means it might not correlate to reality. It might be better to create new terms that might correlate better or with actual reality. Maybe give it up. And this is actually what me and Luminance were saying earlier. When Luminance brought up Wittgenstein, that saying, like, maybe the way we're talking about the world in this area is wrong. And I'm actually in agreement with that sort of statement. And what we replace it with is difficult. Now, there is a question of, like I was saying, phenomenology. Do you have an experience? Sorry. Do you have an experience of like seeing something? And I can say for myself, I kind of do. I can think about it and be like, sort of like picture it in my, like, have some sort of like picturing thing going on. Yeah, what's that worth? Maybe it ain't worth shit. That's fair. But like, we're still doing something. And why do some people say, well, I do this, and other people say they do something else? Fine. And maybe it's not a psychological concept anymore, but we're still talking about something about how we represent the world, or how we talk about our experience in the world. If you don't want to go with representation, probably the wrong way to go. But how do we actually describe our experience here? We can give it up, but there's still a question. But like, it's a good point. K-Pars, it's also hard to know what you have when you can't quite compare it to anything. Yeah, that's part of the issue. It's why I brought up the Wittgenstein beetle in the box. Like, do I have a pain? You have a pain. I can say I have a pain when I do this. You don't have a pain when you do that. So like, you know, something's different between us. Like, so I can say I have an image when I do this. You don't say that. We do something different, but like, we can get to the same answer. It's fine. Luminance is replying to Natty. Yeah, going into like stuff. Okay. Yof says, by the way, actual reality. I don't mean actual reality. We don't want to assume metaphysical assumptions here. No, it's fair. But like they were saying, it's like the question is, there's still a difference between people, and we're trying to figure out how to adjudicate what's going on. Like, and so we might not have the exact words, but there's still a question here. We still describe our experience differently. And why do we do that? Like, I don't think this is a mistake. Like, I don't think some people are like, oh yeah, like I really don't actually think of like faint, like I can't actually see things in my, like I can't actually imagine what something looks like, and other people are like, oh no, like you do actually imagine it, or not. Like, there's something different there. Yeah, I got you, Natty. You didn't mean a corrupt way. I just want to avoid like being sort of like neurotypical terminology, you know, especially in this area. There's no reason to assume some people think more correctly than others. All right, you're going to go to sleep? Oh, thank you for the discussion, Novko. Appreciate it. Yeah, and I do apologize to my Europeans, my foreign people. I know it's not the best time for y'all. Some people don't even have a beetle in their box. What are they doing? Frank says, reminds me of the example, people can't see half their plate of food. They actually can see it, but they don't have the experience of seeing it. Yeah, and that's all up in this discussion here. Like, that's like part and parcel 4 a.m. philosophy streams. I know, it's like, I'm sorry, Europeans and people on the other side of the like world. It's like, yeah, Frank, that's definitely part of the discussion in this area of philosophy. So it's a part of that. Truth is that all you normies are aphantasic by comparison to the synesthetes who can see what color numbers are. Yeah. When I was, for the short time I was in grad school, one of my buddies was, he could see color. When he numbers, he was synesthetic for numbers, and he could see colors associated with them. So, that was always fun to talk to him, because he had a lot of, visual experiences that I don't have, because like, you know, numbers would trigger different colors and different color combinations, and all his passwords were based off different combinations of particular numbers that created particularly pretty color combinations. So it's like, once I knew what his favorite numbers were, I actually knew, like, I could like I could figure out what all his passwords were. So it's kind of funny, but like, yeah. Lumen says, I don't really identify as one, but I do have colors associated with numbers. That's interesting. Yeah. Yep. Okay, multimodal mental imagery and the Stroop effect. But this is one of the reasons when I say like philosophers are an odd bunch. Like, you're gonna get people with rather different experiences out there, and we're trying to make sense of our world. We're all just trying to make sense of stuff, and at least this is my experience. I'm trying to make sense of stuff, and all the shit people say never worked. None of it ever worked when it came to like my experience in the world. And so I had to work really fucking hard and deal with some really like high-powered thoughts, like high-powered concepts to actually get things working, like to make sense in my world. And psychology didn't cut it, like science doesn't cut it. I need the fucking dangerous fucking thoughts that like will fuck your head up before I could like start making sense of anything. And so I'm dealing with like alternative logics. I'm dealing with metaphysics. So it's like theories of knowledge. It's like that's how the stuff I needed to use to like start making sense of my world. And so it's like other people out there are like they're dealing with some like crazy fucking thoughts and they have a very different experience from me. But like that's who you're getting in philosophy. These people are that are like out there and like they can't like we're dealing with stuff that like other people don't deal with because our experiences are different from other people. It's not that I'm like that much smarter than anyone else. I'm probably not. I'm probably like for most things I'm very middling. But like for me to actually explain anything to anyone else about my life, I had to go and do a lot of very weird shit to like make any sense of it. So it's been a pain in the fucking ass to tell you the truth. It's like don't do things like I done them. Do them better, please. Please. Like, really. Multimodal mental imagery and the Stroop effect. It should be noted that the studies discussed in the previous section focus predominantly on imagery attempts. That is, they are designed to elicit voluntary mental imagery. Yeah, so again, what are we doing? Eliciting voluntary mental imagery. Okay. This is relevant since another distinction that Nene draws is between voluntary and involuntary imagery. Notably, during his discussion of unconscious imagery in Aphantasia, Nene recognizes, based on absent imagery priming effects of aphantasics in binocular rival tasks, that aphantasics might not be able to generate voluntary unconscious mental imagery. Okay. What did I do? Cost? Yeah. But yes, whatever Cost says is true. But like, you know, if you go look at the history of some philosophers, it's not always what you think it is. Yeah. However, Nene posits that we cannot exclude the possibility that aphantasics possess involuntary, unconscious mental imagery. And indeed, a recent study provides evidence for a distinction between voluntary and involuntary activity in early visual processing in aphantasics. Yeah, so maybe something is going on that we don't know about involuntarily. That happens in our body all the time. Kabai et al. Investigated the neural activity in early visual processing in aphantasics and controls when listening to natural sounds, so like a dog barking. Importantly, while in one condition, participants were told to merely passively listen to the sounds, and in another they were told to visualize something corresponding to the sounds. Two results of this study are relevant in the context of Nene's arguments. First, the researchers were able to decode content-specific information from early visual areas in the passive listening condition for both aphantasics and controls. This result allows me to introduce another type of mental imagery that is central to Nene's account, namely multimodal mental imagery. Multimodal mental imagery, according to Nene, is defined as imagery that is triggered laterally by sensory stimulation in another sense of modality. Okay, we're still discussing between each other in chat. For example, one's representation of visual elements of one's coffee machine when hearing its noise in another room would be multimodal visual imagery that is triggered laterally by auditory sensory input. Importantly, yeah, so I guess you could hear like if you have like, you know, a drip coffee maker, you might hear the dripping of it or something, or like the water like heating up. And then you could like imagine like, you know, the color of like the coffee going into the coffee pot. But like this would be you have like different things going on when you hear the sound or maybe when you smell it. Okay, for example, one's representation of visual elements of one's coffee machine when hearing its noise in another room would be multimodal visual imagery that is triggered laterally by auditory sensory input. Importantly, Nene argues that every time we hear a familiar sound, multimodal visual imagery gets triggered, thus making it the norm rather than the exception. So in Nene's terminology, we can describe the activity in the aphantasics early visual processing during passive listening as involuntary, unconscious, multimodal visual mental imagery triggered laterally by sensory auditory input. Note, however, that Kabai et al. Did not assess shared representations, meaning that the concepts raised with respect to whether this activity should be viewed as mental imagery as opposed to non-perceptual representation occurring in the perceptual system, as argued above, remain. Yeah. So, I mean, I know what my coffee machine looks like, and like I can see the water in it, like the levels. And so it's like, if I hear, like, I can imagine hearing it brewing, and I can imagine the water going down and going through the system and going and making coffee and dropping into the coffee pot. So it's like all of that can happen by me hearing it because it has a distinctive sound. Also, you could say, well, I know the water is dropping. You don't have to like visualize that water level going down. You can talk about it. Sorry. Just in semantic terms. And that's what they're saying here. You don't need the perceptual representation. I mean, and that's perfectly fair. The second result reported by Kabai et al. Concerns the differences in decoding accuracy between the passive listening and the visualization condition for both groups. In control subjects, visualization unsurprisingly led to an increased decoding accuracy compared to the passive listening condition. In aphantasics, however, not only did visualization attempts not improve decoding accuracy, but the accuracy during these attempts even fell down to chance level. Notably, this finding conflicts with the finding by Chang et al., who report the presence of stimulus-specific, albeit not cross-decodable, representations during their voluntary imagery condition, where participants were instructed to visualize the Gabor patches. So this is interesting. It seems like if you try to get aphantasics to like visualize stuff, they get distracted by trying to visualize stuff, and then they can't remember as well. Like, that actually makes some sense. It's like, go try this thing that you really can't do, and then, like, come up and, like, then give me some answers. It's like, well, that's fucking them up. Like, it goes down to fucking chance, which is kind of interesting. Yeah. It fell down to chance. That's actually super interesting. Okay, however, the result is very much in line with Nanet's suggestion that an absence of voluntary unconscious mental imagery in aphantasia does not imply an absence of involuntary unconscious mental imagery, thus strengthening his voluntary versus involuntary distinction. So while unconscious imagery might not be able to explain aphantasia completely, aphantasia competency on tasks that explicitly require top-down generation of imagery, it might work in cases where the imagery necessary for the task could be triggered involuntarily and or laterally. Frank says, if you imagine yourself wearing a GIMP mask that covers your head and face completely, standing in front of a mirror, what color is your hair? Brown, right? Even though you aren't visualizing brown hair. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. You don't need to be seeing it to like know what color your hair is. That's just like, you can remember that fact without anything else. Like, there is no necessity of the visual like memory or ability to pull up some visualization of it. Okay. However, there are also reasons to be critical of the proposal of involuntary unconscious imagery in aphantasics. While I will not review these reasons here, I will instead discuss a final recent study because it does not only have implications for the discussion at hand, but more importantly, specifically targets a new theory proposed by Nanet to explain a wholly different phenomenon, namely the famous Stroop effect. The Stroop effect, 1935. So this is an old thing. I don't know what... I think I know what that is. Maybe they'll have a picture. Which is one of the most famous effects observed in experimental psychology. Describes the phenomenon that people who are presented with a written colored word, like for example red, take significantly longer to name the ink color of the word if the ink color does not match the color of the word. So incongruity trials. Yeah, so if I like say what color is... like, so now so like you can see, like, I don't know if you can see, it's kind of small on the page maybe, but like red is now highlighted in green. So if I ask you to say, well, what's the color of the highlight, and you read red, you'd be like, oh, that'll fuck you up. You'll be like, well, the red actually is green. So yeah, so do it. So Stroop effect. So there we go, Vipers. Let's go see what this one looks like. Yeah, this is a one, like, these are a lot of fun, these sorts of things. Yeah, so of course it's not going to work the first time. There we go. So yeah, this is, try to read this very fast and you'll see you're going to mess up. Like, I mess up if I try to go fast on this. Of course I can be like red, green, yellow, and then you come down here, red, green, yellow, blue, orange, purple, yellow, but tell me the color now. Green, yellow, green, yellow, blue, purple, red, yeah, the fucking hell. Like, yeah. So, yeah. Okay. Where were we? Okay, while researchers have thus far linked to the effect to difference between the trial conditions in executive functions, Nane suggests that the effect can be explained by mental imagery. Specifically, he argues that reading the color word in incongruent trials automatically triggers unconscious, involuntary visual imagery corresponding to the color word, which then conflicts with the processing of the perceived color, causing the Stroop effect. Cosmonic says I was good at those by practice, but same with the tongue twisters. Yeah, that's one of the things, but the whole fact that you had to practice and could get better at it means that the effect's real, because there wouldn't be anything to get better at if it wasn't an issue. Dojo says I love the tests on short-term memory that they've done on chimps. Yeah, chimps have better short-term memory because they aren't distracted by language processing. See, it's interesting. This is all in the same area. This novel explanation for the Stroop effect has recently been empirically tested. Monzel et al. Compared the performance of aphantasics and controls on the Stroop task by assessing both response time and accuracy, that is, whether participants correctly named the ink color of the word, differences between the incongruent and congruent trial conditions. The authors report that while they still found a significant Stroop effect in aphantasics, they observed a significant difference between aphantasics and controls for accuracy, but not for response time, with aphantasics having a significantly lower difference in accuracy between incongruent and congruent tasks as trials, as well as being more accurate on incongruent trials than controls. Importantly, they did not find a speed-accuracy trade-off, meaning that less difference in accuracy in the context of no difference in response time indicates a reduced Stroop effect in aphantasics. This reduction in accuracy difference between trial conditions in aphantasics thus supports Nane's claim that mental imagery plays a role in the Stroop effect. Yeah, so it looks like something's going on, because otherwise it's not just semantic data then. Okay. However, as Monzel et al. Note, the results simultaneously suggest that aphantasics do not have involuntary unconscious imagery during the Stroop task. This is so, they reason, because if aphantasics had unconscious imagery, we would not expect a difference in the Stroop effect between the groups. Notably, the reduced but still significant Stroop effects in aphantasics, the authors suggest, might show the fact that factors other than mental imagery play a role in the Stroop effect. For example, they note that a Stroop effect was also observed in a numerical version of the task, which likely does not involve mental imagery. Thus, the emerging picture suggests a pluralistic account of influences on the Stroop effect, where mental imagery plays a significant role but cannot account for the effect on its own. Okay, so that's interesting. So it looks like something is going on there, but it's more complicated than this. The whole effect is the whole Stroop effect is more complicated than it might seem at first. It's not just a visual task, which is interesting on its own. Yeah, it is neat. Conclusion. Nane has written an excellent book. You see, after just like being like everything Nane says about this is wrong, they're like, it's still a good book. Let's be nice. We're academics. We're trying to be somewhat friendly here. And I will tell you, the few times people have shit on other people in like I've read on papers and I've seen responses, the response is so like nuclear. That like when like one person like completely shits on another person, they like sometimes the authors come back and go nuclear on them, and it's like, yeah, we may have made some like small mistakes, but like you completely fucked up, and like this is all why. It's like embarrassing. Exactly, Luminance. Classic academic review. Nane has written an excellent book in which he presents a far-reaching and convincingly argued account of mental imagery as a form of perceptual neural representation. Somewhat controversially, his account allows for unconscious imagery, an instance of which he proposes occurs in people with aphantasia. By reviewing recent empirical findings from the neuroscientific and psychological literature on aphantasia, I have argued, contrary to Nane's proposal, that aphantasics do not have unconscious imagery. Concretely, since Nane views imagery representations to be of the same type, that is, perceptual representations, as sensory stimulation-driven representations, I argue that imagery should rely on shared representations as quantified via representational overlap and cross-decodability. While this is, as recent studies show, indeed the case for typical visualizers, it does not hold for aphantasics, thus suggesting that aphantasics do not have unconscious mental imagery. However, whether the activity elicited in aphantasics during involuntary imagery conditions utilizes shared representations remains to be empirically tested. Yeah, so who knows about these involuntary things? Like, it's hard to know what's involuntary and unconscious. Importantly, while I did argue against unconscious imagery in aphantasics specifically, I do not reject the idea of unconscious images as such. Yeah, they might still be able to do it. Like, into whatever degree according to that Stroop effecty thing. Quite to the contrary, I take Nanet's taxonomy, including unconscious imagery, to provide a most helpful structure and vocabulary for future investigations into mental imagery, and, flowing from that, a cornucopia of novel empirical predictions and viewpoints on philosophical and empirical theories and puzzles that are waiting to be explored. Hooray! Okay. Alright, that was, a little hard for me to read at times, but I thought this was overall pretty good. Like, it stepped through Nanet's argument and some scientific results from neuroscience and showed how the science really allowed for there to be sort of gaps in the reasoning and argumentation in Nanet's mental imagery picture in this case, in this one thing. So, for anyone who's new here and anyone in chat now, please, we have an emote review. These are better TTV emotes, so if you only see the text, you can see it on stream, of course. Like, you can just get the better TTV plugin or like 7 Frankerface or whatever. It should all work. And we use these emotes to rate the paper. So if you thought this was fun and made your brain dance, give it a brain dance. Fun ideas makes your brain dance. If you thought it had to do existential or artistic drama and maybe social drama, we could give it a Nog Scream. If it talked about deeper ancient ideas, that's the Nog Oro for an Ouroboros. Nog Knife, slicing and dicing the arguments. Nog Navel gazing only for academics. Nog Turd, all style no substance, still poop underneath. And Nog Grapes for big claims that shrivel up. You can also use the global vote yay and vote nay of Twitch, and my vote meh for something that's like very mid. Note that I do make an overall score out of this. Anything in the green makes the score go up. Anything in the red makes the score go down. And the meh actually makes everything go towards the middle. And you can reuse emotes. So if you really liked it, you can reuse like the vote yays or the brain dance or whatever. Thank you for rating. So Laughing Jesus gave it a yay. Hi, Laughing Jesus. Frank gave it a yay. K-Pars gave it a yay. Brain dance and a knife. Cost Money gave it a yay and a Nog Scream. Thank you. Frank says, also say it says to be a knife. Yeah, I'm with you guys on this one. Rod Durden, thank you for the rating. Gave it a yay. Maybe not quite enough for a dance. Yeah, so I was like, this is like, I felt this was like, as far as like science, at the edge of like science, philosophy, and mind, I thought this was pretty good. So it's like, yeah, I'm with Chad on this. It's a yay and a knife. You're disappointed that you missed most of this. Well, I will highlight this up so you get to see some of it, and they do go up onto YouTube eventually. So yeah, this is gonna get a vote yay and a knife, exactly. Nog Knife, and I'm gonna give it 2 knives because I thought they did a damn solid job of talking about science and philosophy and mind in an 8-page paper that made like it, I thought this was like, for the content that was given here, I thought this was very accessible. Like, this could easily have been a Nog Naval paper, and you can see no one like was just like Nog Naval. No one did that. It was like, talking about the arguments, but it made it in a way that we could like, discuss stuff. So it really, I felt was kind of well presented. Now, that not to say it did have some long sentences with some very big words in it. It was hard for me to read, but in general, this was very solid, I felt, for this sort of thing. Can you retract your scream and give it that? Well, yes, but I will delete your screams. You can give it a scream if you want, but all right, delete scream. I have to manually do that. Boss. He is German. Okay. Yeah, but Hegel was German too, and Hegel ain't writing in any like nice, friendly way. I change your mind and you feel there's more in line. Well, okay, that's fair. I mean, this is one of these issues with this format. I have the bully pulpit, as it were. I get to say things and everyone listens to me more than they're going to read chat because, like, I'm just coming at you visually and auditorily. So it's like I do have that. So don't let me bully you into anything, but, like, yeah, I'll take your word for it. All right, if anyone else wants to get your rating in, now's the time.